Okay, good afternoon, and this time I think it is afternoon. So I'm just going to do a quick summary, or go round the round tables, have a quick look, and find out what was discussed in each table. So in numerical order, I'll start from number 1, which is connected finished vehicle logistics. So I'd like to hand over to Ruud Vossenbelt from Info.
Yeah, thank you very much, Louis. We had a very interesting subject, 3 tables, so a lot of interest in the subject. There are many questions still in this area. I think one of the big questions is where is the expertise in telematics who also knows logistics? We are asking a lot of questions, but in fact some technical people should try to answer these questions. And I think that's challenge 1, to find logistic or telematic people who try to understand vehicle logistics so that they can think with the logistic people how to solve it. Another big question is how can there be some harmonization between car makers, but not only between car makers, but also between different continents in the world. And we had a sort of agreement, it should not be just a European initiative or a US initiative to try to get that harmonization in place, it should be a global initiative. And then the question is, okay, who takes the lead then in sorting this out? And in Europe we have the experience that companies like Jaguar Land Rover, no Nissan, they take the lead, they try to get the other car makers on board. They try also to get the yard operators and the transporters on board. And together, many questions will be discussed between car makers and the logistics service providers to see if there if a common solution can be found. And the next step is then, okay, how does it translate in the technical requirements? So we got questions from car makers, or the car makers asked the transporters and the yard operators, please explain us what you think as added value for telematics in the future, so that then the car makers afterwards can use that and feed that to the telematic experts to bring that also into the car. Yeah, and I think that's a challenge to get into that steering position from logistics into the automotive telematic people to make that work. Also, we learned that the container world already is advanced in this area. We had examples of ports who get most of the containers in with GPS, and there looks to be a sort of standard that they can recognize every container, even while the containers come from all different sort of parties. So maybe we can learn from that. We also heard STAR is an initiative in the US. They probably have standards as well that can be used. And some people also think there should be a connection with a sort of blockchain technology to see if there is a sort of central database where all these different status updates of cars should go in, and that there is also a sort of commonality which makes life easier for the yard operators and the transporters to work with. One of the points that everyone needs to think about in the coming years as well is what's in it for me, and what role do you want to play? And it can be, okay, you can be a follower, you can be a leader, and when you're a leader and you see it as a sales opportunity, then probably you can get a lot out of it. And if you're a follower, yeah, you need to see how can you make sure you are not too late in the game and you can't influence anything anymore. I think that was the summary.
Thank you very much, Ruud. Good discussion there, and good. I hope there was some involvement from everybody in the discussion, Ruud. So good. And next we'll be looking at a framework for standardizing rail performance measurements, which was led by Patrick Lewis from ICL Systems. Patrick.
Thank you, Louis. As you can see by the size of our group, we undertook a discussion about the very sexy subject of standardizing rail performance measurement. We did have a good discussion, and although unfortunately there was no rail participants in our group, we did have a good discussion amongst several OEMs, and and also participation of Peter from the Automotive Logistics Executive Committee. And no doubt, and of really no surprise to anyone, this subject has been discussed probably for the last 15 to 20 years without any agreement on how railroads should be measured. On the truck side, it's very easy. When a truck leaves a facility and leaves the gate, it can be measured to when it arrives at the dealer, and it's fairly simple. On the marine side, a little more complicated because there seems to be a bigger range between when it leaves port to arrives the destination port. But on rail, there's all kinds of variances, whether the rail car is measured from when it's actually loaded to when it's way-billed to when it's actually pulled from the origin facility, or actually connects with the mainline train to a destination, whether it's arrival at the destination yard, placed for unloading, or actually the vehicles touch the ground and are fully offloaded. And then between that, you add the complexity of maybe 2 or 3 different railroads, short lines, belt lines such as the IHB, and how do you measure all of those different segments? So we had a very good discussion on that. We, in defense of the railroads, I think the OEMs need to continue to do a much better job on forecasting. All the railroads would tell you, if you only gave me a smooth volume and you ship the same amount of vehicles every day, then I can commit to certain rail standards and I would meet those easily. Well, I think the railroads would tell you that because they know the OEMs will never do that. So. So one of the things that we also need to look at is, historical averages, seasonality. So in the winter, maybe those trip plans need to be a little bit longer than they are, for instance, in the summer. But in the summer, you got to take into account, all the work programs that are happening on the railroad. So perhaps a multi-year performance, over 5 to 10 years would give you a better idea of what those standards should be. So we had a really good discussion, and I think one of the takeaways is to send a letter to the ALEC team, the Automotive Logistics Executive Committee team that is meeting in April in Detroit at the AIAG offices, and perhaps there can be a discussion there as to whether we can form a team amongst both the OEMs and the rail community to talk about whether there is some need, if you will, to standardize rail trip measurement. So that's all we had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. A good, interesting discussion there on the rail side, and we're very happy. We are a forum for discussion, but for perhaps more action is when you work with organisations like ALEC, AIAG, AHAR, ACA, and so on. So we're happy to encourage discussions and then move on to work with those organisations to be for more practical results. And don't worry, Patrick, any discussion that you're in will always end up being a sexy discussion, whether it's rail or anything else. And now over to investment to meet future demands, Bob Farrell from ACA. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Louis. We have a nice little group here. We had a wonderful little discussion. A lot of it was a BS session concerning around current events and current activities. We did come away with a few things. One of them was possible need for long-term contractual relationships. They were necessary for reinvestments for ROI, especially on the ports facility. We also realized there needs for more standardization, which we talked a lot about. We also realized there's a lack of coordinated processes the uncertainty to justify the investments without industry-wide consensus and support. And thirdly, I think we can take the paradigm of our group's title, investment to meet the future demands, and turn it around and say, what are the demands of the future that are going to drive the investment? What are we going to have to do that the OEMs are going to mandate or force us to do as technology evolves? And right now, those are unknown, so we really can't answer the question, what is the investment to meet future demands? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for the group there for the discussion. And then we'll be looking at dealing with damage. So again, something is very important. It sounds like a kind of a simple subject, but I think we've often found that it's a little bit more complicated than that. So over to Trish Sarek from AIAG. Thank you.
Thank you. Simple, no. No. But a great group. We had a group made up of OEMs and transporters and service providers, so it was really good, and lots of talk about how to really expand on what AIAG has done as far as standardizing damage, how to help individuals report the same damage or see the damage the same way. That's a real challenge for everybody in the supply chain. We also talked with Unicar about globalizing the standardizations through the ECG in Europe, combined with AIAG. And an interesting comment was made, I thought, about how different transportation affects the ability to report the same kind of damage, i.e. if you've got it on a vessel, you've got this sort of damage. If you've got it on a rail car, you've got X sort of damage. So it all goes into play, and we've got to find a way to identify it and standardize that. And then finally, we talked about, I think it was Bill Kerrigan mentioned visibility with an overarching system. We talked about, would better visibility help everybody in reporting damage? And we were thinking, if there was a system where you could see the actual damage reported throughout the supply chain, that would ensure that the right party was held accountable, but also it would reduce administrative costs for the OEMs. So, food for thought. But did we solve damage as an issue? No.
Thank you very much, but it sounds pretty simple to me still.
It is, Louis.
Yeah. And last but definitely not least, we'll be looking at revolutions in the logistics world. a big topic. So over to Chris Seitz from CFR Rinkins. Thank you.
Yeah, it's obviously a very broad theme. When I first proposed it to Nimish, I was thinking of the daily news about Amazon and Alibaba and other technology companies moving into the logistics space. Amazon very asset heavy and having trucks and planes and maybe ships in the future. Alibaba, as far as I can see, very active in really building networks that connect the e-commerce sector with sort of an Uber-type model of hooking everybody up to do the transportation for them. And I might not have this exactly right, I'm not an expert in the subject, but I do read a lot about technology companies that really do not come from logistics moving into logistics, and potentially because they probably do data much better than logistics companies. And so I asked first to list all the companies that we can think of. So the obvious ones are Amazon, Alibaba. There's a company called Flexport out of the Bay Area that's essentially a Silicon Valley startup. It's another basically a technology company called Freightos. Both of these, Flexport and Freightos, they essentially want to be the modern forwarder that uses data to move freight smarter. real quick, one of the interesting examples you always hear when you talk to freight people about, how is technology going to solve the problem if you have a container that's stuck at a port, if something is mechanically not working in some port in the world, no algorithm can quickly solve that problem. That container is still going to be stuck and people have to get involved in fixing it. So people will say that these companies don't always have the answers yet. Another interesting one, I think, is definitely Uber. Uber bought Auto, which is automation of or autonomous driving of trucks, and Uber, obviously, the technology of not having any asset but just letting people and their assets do the work for them. So I guess the big question at the end that Steve brought up, or that I agree with, is sort of the big question: is it moving heavily into assets, and will the technology companies be good at that because they have the money to buy the assets and the technology to operate them smarter, or is it more the Uber model where it's more the actual algorithm and connecting people and connecting assets doing the work? So I don't think anybody really has the answer for that. It's very future talk, and all the dynamics could go in all kinds of directions. Just a random other subject we talked about was we talked heavily about EV versus hydrogen fuel cell. What's sort of the future for cars. One big subject that came out of it is that, are we really all going to be still buying cars on our own, or is it going to be similar again, like an Uber model where you really don't need to own a car? When you need one, you will just have one because it'll be there if you need it, and you'll share. But for those that are going to be bought and used, is electric the future? Is hydrogen fuel cell, LNG, etc.? We have a gentleman from Shell here who knows a lot about that stuff. It was very enlightening for me to learn more about where that technology is heading, and probably has a lot more promise, it seems, as one would think. And one big issue is lack of education, right? People don't know enough about it. And then lastly, also very interesting, 3D printing. It was brought up, and I thought, how is 3D printing going to help logistics? But what the point really was is, it's not going to help logistics because you can just print the goods where you need them rather than making them somewhere else and bringing them there, right? So a couple of concerns brought up in that context was quality, but I personally think that that's probably not going to be the issue as long as you have standards and norms by which the printing is done. Why would that be any different than the manufacturing somewhere else and then shipping it there? So depending on the cost of that technology, it's an interesting thought that you don't, stuff like parts, clothes were brought up, anything that currently is moved long distances costs a lot of money. 3D printing will just solve that problem easily by printing locally. So those are some of the examples we talked about.
Thank you very much. Again, looking at the revolution of the automotive and logistics industries there. So a lot to look forward to. 3D printing would be great from my perspective, but not so good for your perspective, that if you could 3D print me, I won't have to attend all the conferences, but there's nothing like the original. So, and I'm not sure the reaction there was that it was a positive. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed the roundtables. I hope you enjoyed the discussions. I hope you got something from them, something a little bit different that you get from the discussions in the main room. And I hope it encourages this bringing people together, the interaction, and sharing ideas, and perhaps looking at things a little bit differently than we might do in a big group. So let's carry on these discussions in the lunch break that we're now heading to, which is hosted by our great friends at ICL Systems. So I hope you enjoyed the morning sessions. Join us for a great lunch, and please stay for the afternoon final panel, where we'll be having an opportunity to question and talk with and discuss some of the leading people at car makers and vehicle makers and logistics companies in our industry. So enjoy the lunch. If you are leaving early, if you're crazy enough to leave early, please complete the evaluation forms. But it would be better if you're gonna be here. If you might as well stay for the final discussion to hear really what some of the top people think. Thank you.